the cities, where they've been taken in by a humanitarian doctor named Dr. Mafose, who's sort of taken them in against the will of the villagers at the town that they're at. But they're protected there. And so, so this moment, Malia has come back to the house, the doctor's house, and she's looking for, she's looking for Mouse. Malia climbed up the squat's log ladder and levered herself through the trapdoor. So, and everybody sort of keeps their houses on a second level of the ruins. They built their houses all on the second levels of different ruins because there's quail and other sorts of predators that are down on the ground. So she climbed up the squat's log ladder and levered herself through the trapdoor. The smell of sawdust and rotten paper enveloped her, the smells that she most associated with the doctor. Books lay everywhere, stacked and piled, crowding rough-cut shelves, every wall covered. The man couldn't bear to leave the library alone. Malia picked her way around the piles. Mouse? Nothing. When Mouse and Malia had first arrived, they'd rolled their eyes at the man's obsession with books. There was no point saving books unless you were going to use them to start a fire. Books didn't save you from a bullet. But Mafose had stood tall for Malia and Mouse, so if the doctor wanted to keep stacks of books to the ceiling until they tumbled over on you, or if he asked you to hike all the way to a place called Alexandria, then Malia and Mouse were going to do it. The doctor had put himself on the line for them. It was the least they could do in return. We're going to Alexandria, the doctor had said. Why? Malia asked. The doctor looked up from where he'd been studying an old accelerated age map from before the drowned cities had drowned. Because the army of God burns books, and we're going to save them. All the way to Alexandria, ahead of the next big push by the army of God. It was their last chance to save the knowledge of the world, Mafose said. But, of course, they were too late, and by the time they got there, Alexandria was smoking rubble. Corpses littered the town, people who'd thrown themselves in the way of an army, people who tried to shield books with their bodies instead of the other way around. Malia remembered looking at all those dead bodies and feeling sad for the crazy adults who thought books were more important than their lives. When the dogs of war came howling down on you, you didn't stand tall. You ran. That was Swinza. If your enemy was strong, you avoided him. Which seemed pretty damn obvious to Malia and Mouse. But these people had stood tall anyway. So they'd been shot and macheted to pieces. They'd been lit on fire and burned by acid. And their books had burned anyway. Dr. Mafose had fallen to his knees before the torched library and tears ran down his cheeks. And Malia had suddenly feared for him and for herself and Mouse. The doctor didn't have any sense at all, she realized. He was just like the people who kept the library. He'd die for a few pieces of paper. And she'd been afraid, because if the one man who cared for her and Mouse was that kind of crazy, then she and Mouse didn't stand a chance. Malia shook off the memory and called out again, Mouse, where are you? Up here. Malia lifted a flap of old plastic with a fat Patel Global Transit logo on it and eased out onto one of the I-beams that supported the house. 3 stories higher up, legs dangling in the open air, Mouse perched on an iron spar. Of course. Malia took a breath. She kicked off her sandals and balanced her way across a hot, rusty I-beam. Foot in front of foot, looking down at their kitchen and the makeshift surgery, balancing across the fall until she reached a wall of crumbling concrete and its exposed rebar, where she could scale to Mouse's height with less difficulty. She started climbing, using her stump for balance, her left hand for gripping, her bare brown toes finding holds as she climbed. 1 stories, 2 stories. Mouse could just shimmy up the vertical I-beams, a dexterous monkey climbing with his thin legs and ropey arms at perfect angles. Malia had to take the slow way. 3 stories. The world opened above her, around her. 5 stories up, the jungle spread in all directions, broken only where the war-shattered ruins of the drowned cities poked higher than the trees. Old concrete highway overpasses arched above the jungle like the coils of giant sea serpents, their backs fuzzy and covered, dripping long, tangled vines of kudzu. To the west, Banyantown's shattered buildings and cleared fields lay tidy in the sunshine. Occasional walls poked up from the fields like shark fins. Rectangular green pools pocked the fields in regular lines, marking where ancient neighborhoods had once stood, the outlines of basements, now filled with rainwater and stocked with fish. They glittered like mirrors in the hot sun, dotted with lily pads, the graves of suburbia, laid open and waterlogged. To the north, trackless jungle stretched. If you hiked far enough, past the warlords and the roaming packs of coy wolves and hungry panthers, you'd eventually hit the border. There, an army of hackmen stood guard, keeping Drowned City's war maggots and soldier boys and warlords from carrying the fighting any further north, keeping them from infecting places like Manhattan, Orleans, and Seascape, Boston with their sickness. To the south and east, jungle gave way to salt swamp, and finally, Drowned Cities proper. Far off in the hazy distance, the sea gleamed. Malia stood tall atop the gutted ruins, squinting in the bright light. Iron burned under her feet, and the sun beat on her dark brown skin. It was a good time to be lying low, out of the burn, but here Mouse perched, pale and freckled, staring across the jungles. Skinny little light spider, red-haired and skin-roasted, with gray-blue eyes as twitchy as any war maggot she'd ever seen. Not saying anything, just staring out at the jungle. Maybe looking toward where his family used to have a farm, and where maybe he'd been happy before the soldier boys rolled through and took it all away. Mouse said his full name was Melody St. Olmos, like his mother had been trying to make good with the Rust Saint and the Deepwater Christians at the same time, splitting the difference for luck. But Malia had only ever called him Mouse. Mouse glanced over as she dropped down beside him. "Damn, maggot, you got blood all over you," he said. Tawny died. "Yeah?" Mouse looked interested. "Bled right out. Might as well have stuck a knife in her. Baby ripped her inside out." "Damn. Remind me not to get knocked up," Mouse said. Malia snorted. "Too true, maggot, too true." Mouse studied her. "So why do you look down? You didn't even like that girl. She was always in your face about being a cast-off." Malia grimaced. "Amaya and old man Salvatore put the blame on me. Said I was bad luck. Said I put the fate's eye on her, like on Alejandro's goats." "Alejandro's goats?" Mouse laughed. "That wasn't no fate's eye. That was goes around, comes around, coy wolf scent, Alejandro deserved it is what that was." Goes around, comes around. Malia almost smiled at that. The scent had come from a coy wolf dissection that she'd helped Dr. Mafose perform. He was interested in hybrids and wanted to know more about this creature that no biology book of the accelerated age had ever discussed. Mafose claimed the coy wolf had evolved to fill niches that had opened up in a damaged and warming world. All the size and cooperation of a wolf, all the intelligence and adaptability of a coyote. Coy wolf had come loping down out of Canada's black winter darkness and then just kept spreading. Now they were everywhere, like fleas, but with teeth. When Malia and Mafose had cut out the female scent sac, he'd warned her about it, that they should bottle the scent and keep it careful, and wash thoroughly afterward, which had been all Malia needed to know in order to know that she had something powerful in her hands. With Mouse, she'd hatched a plan. It hadn't taken much, and suddenly, Alejandro, who'd been all up on her about being a cast-off and not worth anything except as a nail-shed girl, had his entire herd slaughtered. "Anyway," Mouse said, "how are we supposed to know the coy wolf were going to figure out how to open the gate?" Malia laughed. "That was purely unnatural." And it was. Coy wolves were scary that way, smarter than you wanted to believe. When Malia had seen the ropes and strewn guts and the last few patches of goat fur in the morning, she'd been as amazed as anyone. She'd been aiming to give the dumb farmer a scare, and she'd gotten 1,000 times for that. Goes around, comes around to the Mouse made a face. He deserved it. All talking about how you weren't good for nothing but a nail-shed girl. All that Chinese cast-off stuff. He barely looks at you now. You put the fear of the fates in him good. Yeah, I guess. Malia picked at the rust of the I-beam, peeled off a flake as long as her pinky. But now, with Tawny, it means all his whispering about me carried weight. It was the first thing Salvatore said right after Tawny died. Mouse snorted. They'd blame the cast-off just for breathing. You could be as good as gold, and they'd still blame you. Yeah, maybe. Maybe? Mouse looked at her incredulously. For sure. They're just pissed you actually stood up for yourself. My foes can talk peace and reconciliation all he wants, but if you don't stand tall, no one gives you respect. Malia knew he was right. Alejandro wouldn't have let up on her if she hadn't scared him off. For a little while, she'd been able to walk tall and not feel afraid thanks to that stunt with the Quavo scent. But at the same time, now she had a cloud of distrust hanging over her, and Dr. Mafose didn't let her anywhere near his medicines without supervision. Goes around, comes around, whipping back at her. She grimaced. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter what I do. End of the day, I'm still a cast-off. They either hate me for being weak or hate me for standing tall. Can't win that fight. So what's really eating you? Salvatore said something else, too. She held up the stump of her right hand with its puckered and mottled stub of brown skin folded over. He said Tani would still be alive if the doctor had more hands to help. Yeah? Think he's right? Probably. Malia spat over the edge, watched her saliva do cartwheels to the ground. Me and the doctor work good together, but a stump ain't no hand. Well, if you want to complain about what you got, you can always go back to the Army of God and ask them to take your lucky left. They'll finish the job. You know what I mean. I ain't complaining you saved me. I still can't do anything delicate. Fair me, I got all 10 fingers. Yeah, well, you could do all this doctor work if you tried. You just gotta pay attention and read what the doctor tells you. Not hard for you, maybe. I get twitchy just looking at all those letters. Mouse shrugged. Maybe if I could read up here. Up high, you know? But I don't like being down in the squat with that lantern and all that. I don't like being closed in, you know? You know? Yeah, Malia said. And she did. She did know. She had the same feeling herself sometimes. The chest-tight feeling of the fates setting you up and getting ready to kill you off. It made it hard to focus on a book or even sit still. Maggot twitch, some people called it. If you'd seen much of the war, you had it. Some more, some less, but everybody had it. The only time Mouse really seemed at peace was when he was out in the jungle, fishing or hunting. The rest of the time, he was twitchy and nervous and couldn't sit still and damn sure couldn't pay attention. Malia sometimes wondered what he would have turned out like if he'd been able to grow up on his parents' farm, if a warlord's patrol had never had a chance to kill his family. Maybe Mouse would have been real calm and still then. Maybe he could have read a book all day, or been able to sleep inside a house and not be afraid of soldier boys sneaking up in the dark. Hey, Mouse tapped her, where'd you go? Malia startled. She hadn't even realized she'd drifted away. Mouse was looking at her with concern. Don't go off like that. Makes me think you're going to tip right off. Don't nanny you. If I didn't nanny you, you'd be dead by now. Either starved or chopped up. You need Mama Mouse to look after you, cast off. Oh yeah? If it wasn't for me, you would have been picked up by patrol years ago. Mouse snorted. What? Because you're all Swinza strategic and all that? If I was strategic, I would have figured out how to get out of this place. I would have seen everything falling apart and got out while there were still ships to sail.